All right, I think we should probably get started. It's 6 minutes after 7. I'm not sure how many people have joined us, but I'd like to welcome you. This is our first attempt at using a virtual meeting. When we sent out a survey to all the members about the things that we should do in light of the fact we're canceling all of our meetings for COVID-19, there was a lot of interest in holding virtual meetings. So this is our first attempt, and we feel like this is probably going to go pretty well. And if it does, we may do more of this. We may also do, just seminars and things like that that aren't necessarily related to business meetings that'll be available from time to time to our members and maybe other guests as well. So welcome. I'd like to acknowledge a couple of things here before we get started. First of all, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters because Mike arranged for us to use their Zoom license to do this presentation. So This is being done at no cost to us, thanks to them. And then of course I want to thank Mike as well, because he's done all the expertise work for this and spent a lot of time getting it all set up. I know if I had to have been the one that had done it, it would have been a lot more work than it was, and I'm not sure if it would have come out right. But Mike did a great job, and we really appreciate his efforts. There's a couple of things I want to update you about before we get started. As you might be aware, we provide reading material to the Waterloo and Cedar Falls libraries. One of those is subscriptions to Civil War Times and American Civil War magazines. In the past, it's been kind of hit and miss of getting those renewed and so forth. So I finally got it all set up with them that the renewal notices are going to come directly to our organization, and we are going to pay them directly out of our accounts. In the past, it had been somebody trying to get the subscriptions in and put them on the credit card and then tried to submit a bill and so forth. So we streamlined the whole process. In fact, I got the first bills today. So we are taking care of that. And then also Ken's new book is going to be donated to each of the libraries as well. We did donate the first volume of his trilogy, and now we're going to add the second one to it. So hopefully there'll be people at the library that take advantage of that, because it's well worth reading, I can tell you that. Also, we've had some discussions about the Battlefield Trust. In the past, we have been a member of the Battlefield Trust, and then we have also given donations to specific projects that the Battlefield Trust is doing. Usually that was in coordination with our annual meeting. For example, we had our member of the year or person of the year was Joe Porter, and she designated she'd like her donation to go to Stone River's battlefield. So $100 donation was given in her honor to that particular project. So we've kind of been debating whether we should use our donations to specifically give to certain projects that we'd like to designate, or whether we should just give a general donation, which then of course goes into their general operating funds. There's been kind of pro and cons on both sides, but I'd be interested in hearing any of your ideas about what you would like to see done with that. In my investigation, I found out that we have not given a general donation for 3 years. We've only given the $100 specific donations to specific projects. So we need to make a decision on how we want to proceed with that. So if you've got any thoughts or ideas or any suggestions, we'd certainly like to hear that. Also, we have a project in the works. There is a memorial at Elmwood Park, or Elmwood Cemetery, I should say, in Waterloo, that's a monument to Civil War veterans. It's placed at the location where there are several Civil War graves in a triangle with flagpoles and so forth. The monument was erected back in the 1860s, and I've got a picture of it here for you. I hope you can see it. It consists of 3 gun tubes in a tripod mounted on a limestone base. The limestone base is disintegrating. There was some restoration work done to it about 20 or 30 years ago, I understand, but it needs to be replaced, and the gun tubes need to be refurbished as well. It involves lifting those off of the base. They weigh about 1,500 pounds a piece, and then redoing the base and then remounting them on the base. We're not sure exactly how much it'll cost. It might be somewhere in the neighborhood of $12,000 to $15,000. We've kind of got rough estimates. We're looking now both for donation sources, funding sources, and also a contractor that might be interested in performing the work. So if you have any ideas where we could possibly get funding sources or contractors that might be interested, it would be real nice if they would donate some of their time or some of their equipment or so forth to help the cost. But we're willing to try to raise money to do the whole project. We're doing this in conjunction with the Sons of Union Veterans and the Elmwood Cemetery Administration. So it's a joint venture, and hopefully we'll get this thing refurbished in the near future. And then also we're going to generate a plaque that's going to go on the monument to explain what it is and why it's there. There's nothing in the way of a plaque right now, so nobody knows exactly what this is for. But it's a really nice little memorial. Interestingly, I was doing some research on it and discovered there's a similar kind of monument on the site of Grant's headquarters at the Battle of Shiloh. So I suppose that might have been the impetus for this kind of tripod memorial. But so if you have any information or ideas for us, we'd certainly like to hear from you. Okay, now we're going to move on to our feature presentation here. The primary purpose for our meeting tonight is for all of us to hear about Ken Lyftogt's new book, his second book in the trilogy of his History of Iowa and the Civil War. This one is titled From Iuka to the Red River. I got a copy of it a few weeks ago, or a couple of weeks ago, from Ken, and I jumped right into it, and I've about more than halfway through it, and I have to tell you, it's really good reading. So Ken's going to tell us all about it, and we appreciate him taking his time to be here and letting us know what our favorite historian has done lately here. So Ken, it's all yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Frank. Can everyone see me? How do we get my up?
You're coming through fine, Ken.
Okay.
Yep, you're good.
Very good. Welcome to my man cave. It's interesting. It's like students coming into my office at UNI. Well, I'd sure like to thank everyone involved, Joe and Frank, for putting this together. As far as the book, this is 15 years of my life will so far, and it's a very rewarding experience. Very daunting, but by golly, we got 2/3 of it out there. Volume 3 is in the can. Spend the winter tweaking that. But first, I'd like to acknowledge the people who make me look good. Clark Kenyon, my publisher, editor, Camp Pope Publishing. He takes my raggedy ass manuscripts and he turns them into works of art. I'll take the blame and the credit for every written word, but you wouldn't read it if it wasn't pleasant to hold and to look at. And he did all that and everything else that goes with publishing. And our local people, Grant Veeder, Bill Witt, Ron Prawl, who served as proofreaders, which is often a job that is really thankless in so many ways and so very necessary. So they didn't have the fun of just reading the book. They were working, and I truly appreciate them. Well, when I think of these 3 volumes, to me, they are the book. I wrote it as one, and knowing it would have to be broken into 3 volumes. But it is really just a continuation of where we left off with volume 1. The Battle of Shiloh is over, the definitive battle in the Western theater. And the story, as the introduction to this volume explains, to understand Iowa and the Civil War, you have to understand the Western theater, and to a lesser degree, the Trans-Mississippi as well. Shiloh opened the way for the Union invasion of the Deep South. Beginning at Fort Donelson in December and now April 1862, General Grant has 3 armies deep into Mississippi. That's where we leave off. At Shiloh, Iowa had, by that point, Iowa had 15 regiments in the field, and 11 of them fought at Shiloh. This is Iowa's battle. Well, if Shiloh secured Grant's invasion, the real contested city was the city of Corinth, Mississippi. And Union forces occupy Corinth. Now, for the Confederacy, this is their final chance. People talk about in the debate over Civil War, what is the high water mark of the Confederacy? What are the distinctive turning points? And the most important often we see is Gettysburg, Pickett's charge. But I would maintain in the larger picture, it's the Battle of Corinth, 2-day battle. Here, the Confederates understood. Now, Grant's armies are stretched from Corinth all the way back to Memphis, Tennessee. If they could knock out, I describe it as snaking these, Grant's armies are snaking all their way back to Memphis. They're strung out, though there are thousands and thousands of soldiers. If the Confederacy could attack the head of that snake at Corinth, lop it off, they could now start rolling back that invasion. If they failed to do it, the Confederacy from that point on would be fighting a defensive war alone in the West. That leads us to the Battle of Iuka on 19 September 62, which ultimately is a preliminary to the Battle of Corinth. But it's significant in the big picture, but it's also significant to Iowa. I really concentrate on battles and campaigns where Iowa is prominent. So, for example, battles where Iowa troops are not engaged are described in the book because we need to know about them, but not in any kind of detail. Whereas other stories might ignore Iuka and concentrate on Corinth and just kind of give Iuka kind of a brush off. But for Iowa, this is also the story of 2 Iowa regiments, the 5th Iowa Infantry and the 17th Iowa Infantry. One of the things I get asked about frequently is, well, my ancestor served in such and such a regiment. Would that be mentioned? And I could say, by the time all 3 volumes are read, anyone can pretty much trace the history of about every Iowa regiment in the war, though I don't deal with the border regiments. But the others, for example, I just sent a book to a fellow in Illinois who had an ancestor in the 9th Iowa Infantry. So you read volume 1, it'll show you how the 9th was organized. By the time you read volume 2, they're the old veteran regiments. Well, at Iuka, the 5th Iowa had been around for a while, but it had never fought a major battle. Here it is at Iuka, and what happens to the 5th is one bloody story. The 17th Iowa was a new regiment, organized that summer, had never been in battle. Its colonel, John Rankin, you met in volume 1. He was a member of Congress. He was in the Iowa legislature, and he was an active supporter of the war, always visiting the Keokuk camps, cheering on the 1st Iowa Infantry. He gave them their pet eagle, their mascot. And he was so instrumental to Governor Kirkwood that Kirkwood promised him, though he had no military experience, he was just a very important political figure, the next Iowa regiment formed will go to you. And that was the 17th. And what happens to the 17th Iowa at Iuka, well, it is just a terribly tragic story. And we can follow those. By the time volume 2 is over, the 5th Iowa Infantry, the 3rd Iowa that you saw at the Battle of Blue Mills and at Shiloh. They're shot to pieces. They no longer function as regiments. By the time you finish Volume 3, the 17th Iowa will have created a name for itself second to none, and it will be shot to pieces and be destroyed as a regiment. So you can follow any of the Iowa regiments from the time they are formed till the war is over. And Iuka introduces us to the 5th and the 17th. Now, there are many familiar characters introduced in the first volume that now become more prominent, and many new characters being introduced. But one of the themes of the books is this really intense battle for rank and the marriage of politics and the war. They are just like Siamese twins. They're totally intertwined with one another. And so often we look at the Civil War, everybody's an armchair general. You read The Killer Angels and suddenly everybody is Lee or their Chamberlain or something. Well, Iowa only produced 3 major generals: Grenville Dodge, Francis Herron. Volume 1 introduced Samuel Curtis and explained how he achieved that high rank. Volume 2 goes into the very intense battle. Every state wanted as many major generals as they could. These are prized positions. You got to go all the way to Lincoln to get these things. And you see the intense competition between Iowa brigadiers who want that major general's rank, and especially Grenville Dodge and Francis Herron. And we'll see how Francis Herron becomes the youngest major general in the Union Army. Grenville Dodge will spend the next couple of years trying to get that 2nd star. So we see them growing in rank and importance. And what happens to Francis Herron and his division is often, well, a friend of mine, he once wrote a paper that I stole the title from once, called Iowa's Forgotten General, Major General Francis Herron. He gets lost in the Civil War. He's a major general, but if you go to the Soldiers Sailors Monument in Des Moines, you won't find his likeness there. You'll find every other brigadier, the other 2 major generals, but you won't find Herron. What happened to him? Volume 2 explains that. And in Volume 3, we'll see it again. So there are familiar characters following the regiments. Now, one of the things to always be looking at, as I say, is this marriage between politics and the military. Every officer is a politician. Every hometown captain was a local leader. He could recruit men, convince men to follow him into war, into battle. He had aspirations. Every officer, to get an officer's commission, had to be well connected politically. And there's a lot that I say on that. Here, I want to do a little bit of reading, how that worked. Here's the call for new volunteers in the summer of 1862. The summer call brought forth a new crop of ambitious hometown leaders who wanted to be captains. They were Governor Kirkwood's most important source of recruits. Each aspirant captain knew that he was not needed in the veteran regiments. Every captaincy there was taken, with a ready roster of experienced lieutenants in line for promotion. The would-be captains forewent enlisting in the old regiments and recruited men for new companies bound for new regiments. They put ads in their local newspapers, threw public celebrations, offered bonuses, and raised their companies. The new regiments needed colonels. The obvious source of experienced officers was in the veteran regiments. Veteran officers serving as subordinates in the old regiments pulled every string they knew to get a command in one of the new regiments. Colonels' commissions were also political currency, and Governor Kirkwood took full advantage of the situations. The new regiments were the perfect opportunity to strengthen the Republican Party by rewarding military heroes and influential politicians. Every colonel's rank had political favors attached. Governor Kirkwood also used his military patronage to court war Democrats. From the start of the war, and despite Republican criticism, Kirkwood had rewarded war Democrats with important military offices. Each of these Democrat officers also had a constituency back home. If they could be won to the Republican side, others were sure to follow. The list of, yes.
What are you
Mike?
trying to get?
How they, these are all red, how do they know, how do I know what do I do now? What do I do?
What are you trying to do?
I want to join they can't hear me when I talk.
They can't hear you?
Yeah, what do
I can hear you.
Oh, you hear me, Mike?
I hear you, Mike.
Okay, okay, go ahead then. I'm sorry. Back to you.
Okay. Anyway, let's go. I'll repeat that. Kirkwood had rewarded war Democrats with important military offices. Each of these Democrat officers had a constituency back home. If they could be won to the Republican side, others were sure to follow. The list of converts was impressive and growing. The most notable example was Iowa's Adjutant General, Nathaniel Baker. But there were others: William Belknap of the 15th Infantry, John Corse of the 6th, James Williamson of the 4th, and the list went on. Well-earned promotions for deserving war Democrats would do much to enhance the process of Republican conversion. So there's no corner of this where politics, rank, and the war are not totally brought together. And a big part of the Volume 2 is now emancipation becomes a key cornerstone of the war. And emancipation is a process. It is not an event. And how to deal with this. There's 2 chapters on how the process that leads to the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation takes place. And here I have one of the greatest voices that any author could find. You met her in Volume 1, Carolyn Cason. She's the wife of Lincoln's Assistant Postmaster General, John Cason, who will then be elected to Congress. So for all 4 years of the war, I have this woman in Washington, D.C., in the highest echelons of the government, writing letters back home to what becomes the Des Moines Register throughout all 4 years of the war. She writes under the pen name of Miriam. And as a college professor, I had graduate students, and I would hire graduate students to go find sources for me. And when I heard about Miriam's letters to the Register, I hired a graduate student to go through every wartime edition of that newspaper and make a physical copy of Miriam's letters. So as I'm writing the book, we get to a specific item. Well, what did Carolyn Cason, what did Miriam write to the people of Iowa about? And what I want to share with you is the big part of this process of emancipation. Now, one of the themes of my books, and you see this in so many good Civil War books, is that one of the most offensive parts about slavery has nothing to do with race. Even abolitionists could be as racist as any Southern slaveholder. But what slavery did, which is so offensive to the North, is create in this land of liberty a transplanted European aristocracy, a new landed gentry of lords and ladies who believe they are born to command. Now, for good Democratic Iowans, and I just wrote an essay on that, how Ruth Suko's upbringing really reflected this. In Iowa communities, in northern communities, there was a certain working democracy. The blacksmith was as important as the banker, and the mill worker could go on and be elected mayor. And these people were truly offended at this growing aristocratic feudal culture of the South. Here in one of the Miriam letters, Carolyn Kaysen writes, "These people want two classes, an aristocracy and slaves. For the middle class, they ignore. I have been amazed to find how superficially educated the Southern ladies are." She's really offended at these Southern women. "I am amazed to find how superficially educated the Southern ladies are. A few show-off pieces for the piano, a smattering of language, certain airs and graces, very winning manners, and a capacity for ordering blacks. This seemed to constitute the Southern lady." So she's offended at this new breed of aristocrats. And this comes in within the context of the emancipation begins in Washington, D.C. It's not a state, it's under congressional authority. And when the war begins, secession takes place. Now the Republicans in Congress can act directly in D.C. And here we see Iowa Senator James Grimes at his best. And the slaves are emancipated, but it's compensated emancipation. The owners are paid for losing their slaves. And the unofficial suggestion was, now just pay the slaves' wages, make them part of the working class. Well, here is Miriam talking about that and those Southern women. "The district ladies have been sadly troubled with regard to servants since the Emancipation Bill passed. As soon as the slaves were free, wonderful to relate, ungrateful property, but the masters and mistresses, moved by the lofty chivalry of the South, vowed never to pay them a cent of wages, and proudly exclaimed, 'We will work our fingers to the bone first.' And of a truth, they've had to do it. So I have pitied the heavy spirits of my Southern sisters, who have eaten for the first time the fruit of their own imperfect labors. But I think that the experience will do them no harm." The Miriam letters put slavery at the very heart and center of the war. She's writing to the editor of the Des Moines Register. "Mr. Editor, the madder the Southern people get, the better I feel. The idea of succumbing to this dragon, slavery, when he is in our power, why, it would shame to us forever. Is God hardening our hearts? Do we need more chastisement? Let it come, then, say I. What we need, what we shall have, either slavery shall conquer us or we shall conquer slavery. And I believe heaven has heard the black man's cry, and the oppressed shall yet go free." This was months and months before the Emancipation Proclamation. She's just a delightful character. Grant Feeder read her parts. He wrote back, she is a hoot. And in volume 3, we see the 13th Amendment through her eyes as it's passed in Congress. She's right there. She's there at Lincoln's inauguration, second inaugural. Well, the book is a chronological study, trying as much as possible to keep things in their proper order, though there's a certain kind of back and forth now and then. Militarily, we watched the Western campaigns from Iuka to Corinth. When I had the honor of accepting the Pate Award in Fort Worth last winter, one of the questions in the lecture was, well, in volume 2, are you going to address Vicksburg? And I said, it takes me 5 chapters to do justice to the Vicksburg campaign, which is, the longest, most sustained campaign, except for those against Richmond. So we go to Vicksburg, to Chattanooga, and to the Red River. Iowa troops in the center and the heart of each of these bloody campaigns. But there's also some stuff happening at home. The political questions. There in 1862 is a congressional race. Now, this is significant for Iowa, because Iowa began the war with 2 members of Congress, but the 1860 census could now take into account all the immigrants who had come to Iowa over the years. So now, by 1862, Iowa has enough of a population for 6 representatives, 4 new ones. So this is a fierce, fierce race. If the Democrats could start putting some Democrats in Congress, they could get some leverage. So we have to watch that carefully. How does the government prevent this? Here's where you see the arrest of some of Iowa's leading Democratic editors. There's also, I never want to ignore, that Iowa's war effort also rested solidly on the backs of some remarkable women. Here's where I like Joe Porter. I mean, when she gets this volume, these things done, she's done so much with Annie Wittenmeyer. Joe, is my Annie your Annie? Do we recognize the same person? But she's the towering figure, and it's an embattled position she finds herself in. And the story of Annie Wittenmeyer and the Civil War is not only the story of her, it's the story of Iowa, it's a story of politics. And another wonderful voice I found was in a collection of letters of a woman named Amanda Shelton. Her older sister was Annie Wittenmeyer's personal secretary. And Amanda joined up when Annie Wittenmeyer created what were called the diet kitchens. And her letters were collected in a marvelous book, not by a historian, but by a nursing student in Iowa City who was fascinated by Civil War nurses. And I just got a wonderful message the other day from someone who just finished the book. He says, you just pound us with these bloody, horrible battles. And then at the end of the book, we meet Amanda Shelton. It's like a breath of fresh air. She's such an angel. She has a magnificent voice. And one of the things that I include here is, what about the anti-war voice in Iowa, the so-called Copperhead movement? And I focus on what's called the Tally War or the Skunk River War, the only time in Iowa history where hundreds and hundreds of anti-war Democrats took up arms ready to go to battle against the state authorities. And it is an interesting story, the Skunk River War or Tally War. So within this volume, we see the continuation of the military, the political, and the home front story we began in volume 1. By the time we end, Grant has moved to the Army of the Potomac. He's now in command of the Eastern Theater. William Sherman, with 17 Iowa regiments in his armies, is now going to begin the advance on Atlanta, while Grant begins the advance on Richmond for the final year of the war. And the title for volume 3 is The Longest Year. Anyway, I hope you like the books. And you got any questions for me?
I've got one, Ken.
Please.
This doesn't specifically relate to Iowa, other than it involves some of the Iowa troops that fought at Vicksburg. When you were talking about the final assault that was made on the Vicksburg works on the 22nd of May, I believe it was, you talk about McClernand's troops that assaulted the railroad redoubt.
Yeah.
And then he subsequently asked Grant for reinforcements because he claimed he had a breakthrough.
He did that all day.
Yeah, and I kind of got the feeling from the way you described it in your book that you accepted McClernand's version of it, that he actually did have a breakthrough, and that if he had reinforcements, he could have broken through into the interior of the lines. And
That's a really good question. Oh, go ahead, please.
Yeah, most books seem to favor the Grant interpretation, where McClernand was just blowing hot air and really hadn't really accomplished much, and that's sending him reinforcements or another advance along the front, all the way along the front, would be a waste of time. I was just wondering how you felt about that.
Well,
of course, the Iowa connection was the 22nd Iowa that broke through it.
And the 23rd. Yeah, well, what I'm doing here is I'm not enough of a military authority to really challenge. But what I'm saying is that the Iowa troops that held that door open hour after hour from the morning until dark, they believed it. They believed if McClernand had been properly reinforced, that the breakthrough would have won the war. I can't say one way or the other, but I do include that Grant totally dismissed it. But I do show the story. Here's an Iowa sergeant, the only one taking prisoners. He takes them all the way back up the ranks of the generals, begging for reinforcements. And he believed it. Harvey Graham, who broke through into the railroad redoubt and fought there all day until he was captured, he believed it. He wrote letters to McClernand saying if we would have been reinforced, we had it. So I am not so much taking a side in it, but I'm saying this is what the Iowa troops believed. And the result of that is their separation from Grant's army. As they said, we went down with McClernand. Here's the greatest moment of that terrible day. No one remembers it. And McClernand is fired. His 13th Corps is sent off to the Louisiana Bayou. And and so they are separated. They went down with McClernand. And they always believed that they had achieved that breakthrough. So that's a good subject for debate. But I am not enough of a general to say which is so, but I do know that the Iowa troops believed it to be.
Great.
Let me have another good one like that.
Well, Ken, I can't resist. I haven't read your book. Mike's got it in his office, but I have been doing a little family tree work, and I had a great-great-grandfather, Robert Falloon, who was with the 24th Infantry Regiment with something called the Iowa Temperance Regiment.
Now, you'll find them well documented in this book. They're one of the stars of the book. They're literally a temperance regiment organized by a minister, and what they're trying to do is appeal to Kirkwood needs volunteers. There are a lot of people who won't volunteer because the Army is notorious for drinking.
Oh,
And
yes.
parents don't want their sons to go into a drinking army. You know, prohibition was the big battle in Iowa at the time. So the 24th Iowa is organized, and all of its members swear an oath never to touch liquor or hard cider. And you will find their story to be one of the most exciting of the whole war. There's just no end to it. You'll especially when you see them at the Battle of Champion Hill. They are at their best, and they produce one of the worst officers and some of the very best. And one of the things I do, I mean, I like dramatic and triumphant history. But one of the things, if you're a scholar of Civil War, everybody's ancestor was a hero and nobody fought for slavery. I don't pull those punches. You find in volume 1, here's an officer relieved of command at Shiloh because he's in battle drunk.
Oh,
You'll
no.
find what happens to the commanding colonel of the 24th Iowa.
One of
So-
the
Yes, Jim,
one of the
please.
interesting things about the 24th was I think was it Byam, I think was the colonel.
Yeah, that's the colonel.
And he had quite a few sons, I guess maybe sons, nieces, or nephews, or whatever. But like one of them was a 12-year-old drummer boy, like 12 or 13 years old was listed in the roster. So,
Wow.
but I think I don't think he served for that long of a time. But that was, I kind of found that interesting when I was looking up. I think Ken knows that I collect a lot of letters and stuff from people that
And you share them.
but from like all Iowa regiments. But like when I was kind of looking through them, I noticed it was 12 years old. Wow. So
Yeah.
that's kind of something I found kind of interesting.
Other questions? Comments?
And then also, Ken, is Annie, how do you say her last name?
Annie Turner Wittenmeyer.
Yes. Is she the one who decided that we needed the Iowa Orphans Home here in Cedar Falls?
She was one of the primary movers for all of the orphans' homes. She was most closely identified with Davenport.
Okay.
But yeah, none of them would have been set up without her. Her after the war, and Joe Porter would address this far better. Her after the war record on things like that, prohibition and stuff, is exemplary. But that was, of course, is the logical extension of her work during the war. And a nice monument to her outside of Lang Hall.
Oh, and just by the way, I wanted to mention that my relative did make it to full corporal.
He can drill a company.
Yeah, but oh my goodness, when I was looking at the loss, the regiment lost 9 officers killed or mortally wounded. Well, if you're mortally wounded, aren't you killed? I didn't quite
Well,
get.
you suffer for a while.
Okay.
You die of your wounds.
3 officers died of disease. 119 enlisted men were killed or mortally wounded, and 212 men died of disease or accident.
Yeah, a fellow stopped over a while back, and one of the things just shocked him. Now, keeping in mind that by this time of the war, most Western regiments, Iowa regiments, now a regiment is supposed to be between 900 and 1,000 men, including officers and musicians, and surgeons and the rest. But they're so used up. And like I was saying before, they're not being replenished very well because everybody wants a new regiment where they can be colonels. So by the time, say, of Vicksburg, an average Iowa regiment, say, talking about the 21st or 23rd at the railroad redoubt, they were lucky if they were sending 300 men into that battle out of the regiment. And it was not uncommon for half of them to be shot in one day. How psychologically does and they go in battle again. So it is just an amazing thing. And he's just appalled at these incredible losses. You know, you just said, and dozens of Iowa soldiers shot down in the next 5 minutes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Jim.
One of the interesting things I've noticed is like when you see when some of these guys were promoted from, say, like captain to major to lieutenant colonel to colonel, you'll notice that, you know, it was like a day or two after the guy he was replacing had been wounded or, you know, either mortally or just incapacitated enough that he could no longer command the unit. And, you know, it was kind of, you can kind of follow the progression of some of these guys.
Oh, you can. And by following the casualty rates of the guys right above them.
And I don't know whether you can answer this question too, but like when you look at some of the roster and records of the soldiers, you see like an 8th corporal, 7th corporal, 6th corporal, 5th corporal. Do you know what the difference is on those? Out of curiosity?
Yeah, there is that is the rank of who commands who. They are all the rank of corporal, but a 1st corporal commands the 2nd and 3rd and 4th.
Okay.
I've never seen it as far as 6.
Did they have like specific duties or anything like that?
Not particularly, but you know, in the military, everybody is under somebody's command.
Okay.
If you send 2 people out on a detail, one guy's in charge of the other guy. So everybody has to know their place in the command structure. And every company has corporals. And there are 10 companies in the regiment.
Yeah.
Who commands what. So it's broken down, but it would take a far more somebody more knowledge of the real inner workings of that part of the command structure. But you always get, well, he's just been made 1st corporal over me. And then I was a corporal first, and that sort of thing. So it is a matter of command.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, how are we doing, Frank?
We're doing real well. I just wanted to make one comment if there weren't any more questions. As I said, I've read about a little more than half of your book already, and in the chapters that you call the emancipation, you got 2 chapters of the emancipation. I've got to tell you that you have most simply and succinctly described the causes of the Civil War, more so than any place I have ever read. I've read a lot of books on the causes of the Civil War, but your explanations in those 2 chapters are so easy to understand and so simple that I think when I was reading it, I thought, here's the chapter for high school textbooks on what caused the Civil War. It's so easy to follow and so sick. I really think you did a great job on that. So
thank you. You just made my day. That's the hope. That's that is the hope. My old friend John Baskerville, who taught history with me at UNI, he taught Iowa history, and he wanted to, and he really knew nothing so much about the 19th century, much less the Civil War, but he'd use my books in his class, and he wanted to do some units and some lectures on emancipation, especially with an Iowa. So I gave him the manuscript copies of those 2 chapters, and he said he got 6 lectures out of it.
Yeah, they're really good.
Well, thank you so much. That's the dream. Probably a good place to knock off.
Yeah, I think we're if I'm correct, Mike, we have to sign off by 8 o'clock. I don't know if Mike heard me. Well, I guess that's the end of Ken's presentation, and we really don't want to thank him for giving that to us. He has a lot
heard
of,
you, but I had muted myself. You can stay on as long as you need to stay on.
Yeah. He enlightens us in a lot of Iowa involvement. I know I've read some books on the 22nd Iowa, and of course read a lot of books about the Vicksburg campaign, but his presentation of that that battle around the railroad redoubt gave me a new appreciation for the 22nd Iowa.
They
And,
are a heck of a regiment, isn't it?
yeah, I was on the edge of my seat and I was squirming while they were fighting, trying to help them out.
Oh, every author wants to hear that.
So I hope everybody has a chance to read your book, Ken, because it's a really good one. It's a great compliment to the first one that you put out as well.
Yeah,
Well,
it's an
thanks to
excellent
you,
read.
be in the library.
So
Anyone
I
wants
hope,
a copy, just get a hold of me.
very good. Also, I want to mention that the recording of this session, Mike is going to put that out on Facebook, and then he's also going to do some editing to it so that it can be put out on YouTube, so that people can look at the presentation.
It's already on my Facebook page.
Okay.
I wasn't able to put it onto your page because I never got permission.
Oh, okay.
So
Well,
what
I'll
I'll
have
do
to.
then is I'll download it and I'll edit it and I can put it on probably my YouTube channel until someday you folks should think about creating a YouTube channel and doing a regular series.
So hopefully that'll help get the word out for Ken's book and get more people to take a look at it, and also hopefully get some advertisement out there as well for our organization, and maybe get some better participation and get us some more programs and things that we can use in our club meetings.
And keep in mind that if you're going to use something like Zoom, you could bring in speakers from anywhere in the world. It doesn't cost anything extra. You just, you don't have to fly in, you don't have to use the hotels, you don't have to waste all the time. And it works pretty well.
Yeah, it does. I'm really pleased at the way this one went, and I hope those of you that were involved did as well. If you have comments or you would like to make suggestions, I'd like to ask you if you would send an email. I've got a couple email addresses. This is my low-tech presentations here. The first one is my personal email address if you want to send me a comment or question or suggestions. The second one is the general email address for the Civil War Roundtable. So you can address your comments to either one of those, and we'll be glad to hear from you and possibly take those suggestions and work on future presentations. So thank you all very much for your participation. I would like to put a little plug in for the League of Women Voters. Make sure you go vote since they were so gracious to let us use their Zoom license. And please, all of you and your family and friends, all stay safe and stay out ahead of the COVID-19 virus. And hopefully maybe in the near future, we'll all be able to get back together again as a group. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank.
Thanks.